I've always been sensitive to spirits being present. For as long as I can remember, there has always been someone there in the corner of my room at night, or creaking in the walls. My house was built during the Great Depression. My mom, grandfather, and great-grandfather, who built the house, have all lived here. I remember one night, I was 5 or 6, I think, and it was summer. I was in my backyard. It was pretty late, and I looked in the bushes and saw a face. Being the curious little kid that I was, I nudged a little closer. The face was weird looking, almost unhuman, and was a weird tint of green and almost transparent. As I drew closer, it just popped out of the bushes. I screamed and ran to the front porch where my mom, dad, and brother were. I never told anyone about that face. Eventually, that incident was drawn onto my head. I hadn't thought about it, and with other things going on, frankly, I just didn't care. Until one day, my second grade class was on a field trip to the Historical Society. One of the exhibits was of a small bedroom in the 1850s time. I was in the attic kind of bedroom with the ceiling slanted, and I went towards the bed, and for a few seconds, this person was lying on the bed. She looked up at me, and then she was gone. I was so frightened, I just ran out of the room and hid downstairs till my teacher and the rest of the class came down. There would be sightings every now and then, mostly in the basement. I would hear someone hiding behind the water heater and bookshelves and would eventually just refuse to go down there. When my mom asked me about this, I told her there was someone down there. She refused to believe this, and I just stopped trying to convince her. The only time I can say that a spirit just scared the crap out of me was when I was in the 5th grade. I was in the park with my dad and was visiting the memorial. While my dad was doing something, I don't remember what, I went off to one of the stones farther away. I leaned up next to the stone and was reading the description on it. And while I did so, a man came up to me. He looked very frightened. He bent down next to me and asked me something. I think about the weather, and he looked like he wanted to cry or something. I don't know. He kind of looked like when you're dying to ask someone something, but you don't know how to ask them. That's what his face looked like. I remember asking him if he was okay, and he just burst into tears. He said something like I had to help him. I was the only one who could help him. He looked so frantic and desperate that he was scary looking. I didn't know what else to do, so I just ran towards my dad shaking from head to foot. Looking back, I wish I could have helped him. I just didn't know how. I know there are some skeptics out there who'll go around saying it's all in your mind and it's playing tricks on you, or one of my mother's personal favorites, it's just your imagination. But if we let that take over our better judgment, no one is going to help these lost souls, and somebody has to. You just have to be willing to believe. Hi, my name is Christine, and I was a student at Heidelberg College, which is located in Tiffin, Ohio, and far from any other places of civilization. As a freshman and sophomore, I lived in France Hall. France Hall is, and has always been, an all-girls dorm. Another fun fact about Heidelberg College is that it was one of the first colleges to allow women to attend. As a new resident of France Hall, I was told about our most famous ghost, Ellen. There were a few odd experiences. For example, the normal cold spots in the dungeon, aka the basement or laundry room, noises, and whatnot. During my sophomore year, I pledged into one of the oldest societies on campus. It was during my pledging process that I learned about the story of Ellen. Shortly after the Hesperian Society split into 2 new societies in 1913, a Glossian Society and the Palantheon, also known as Hughes and Phils. Ellen wanted to go through the pledging process. FYI, women had to place bids or asking permission to join a Greek organization. If the group does not believe a woman will benefit from the society, she can be rejected. Ellen was rushing Phi and would wear their colors every day before the bidding day. Sadly, Ellen was not invited into the Palantheon Society. Greatly upset by this, She went into the attic, wrote and carved fire dye on the walls and rafters. Near the doorway, she hung herself. Today, the door to the attic is locked. I've tried to get in. Normally, Ellen just likes to play around. She has fondly locked me out of my room when I was in the shower a few times, turned on the TV at all hours of the night during exam week, and my favorite, turned the radio to a different station. I've also been in the catacombs, under Founders Hall, and visited the haunted meat room. It wasn't spooky or anything, but I can understand why a lot of the halls are blocked off now. Easy to get lost, and the hooks that used to hang on the meat room are no longer there. Brown Hall is now haunted by a young man who killed himself on the railroad tracks right behind the campus a few years ago. He likes to goof off on the girls' floor of that dorm and watch over some of the students who were close to him before he died. He also likes to play around in the bathroom. Interesting. My boyfriend, we'll call him Steve, works at his family's farm that's been around for 124 years. So basically, it's been in the family for 5 generations. There have been a lot of changes, which is expected when you have a piece of property that's so old, but there are buildings that remain the same. These buildings, along with a creek that runs right by the property, I believe are not haunted, but replay things that happened long ago. Steve has seen these images and explained them to me. For instance, the milk house is an old building that still stands, but is now used as a workshop. At the right moment, you can watch Steve's great-grandfather working in the building. He passed away many years ago. Also, in the old part of the barn, he's seen helping hands or workers from the past walking around. They never even seem to notice that Steve is even there. These encounters seem pleasant, and if you knew they were past relatives, I can understand why you might be glad to see them. But the experience I had was not pleasant, and I was definitely not glad to see it. Back in the 1920s, one of Steve's relatives had a 2-year-old girl. This poor little girl wandered away from the house, fell into the creek by the garden, and drowned. She wasn't discovered until the next morning. Her body had floated downstream. This story is important because it plays a part in my encounter. About a year ago, I decided to take the rowboat out into the creek. I have a little girl, 2 years old at the time, whom I left in the care of Steve since we didn't have a life jacket for her. This was my first time in the boat, and I was excited about seeing Mother Nature since the landscape was beautiful around the area. I must have been on the water for only 15 minutes before I heard a loud splash close to the bank. I looked to my right, but didn't see anything, not even ripples in the water, indicating that something had fallen in. This made me extremely curious, so I decided to row the boat closer to the bank. Now, the bank is about a foot above the water level, and the water is roughly about 3 feet deep. Before I could even grab a hold of the oars, I saw what I thought was my daughter, since she was small and had brown hair, splashing around in the water and swinging her arms desperately back and forth as if trying to hold on to something. What I didn't realize at the time was that there was absolutely no sound of the splashing. Being deathly scared for my daughter's life, I didn't think about it. I jumped into the water and began swimming desperately towards the bank. I can't even begin to explain how I felt. All I can say is that I was more determined than ever to reach her. I remember stopping once my feet could touch the bottom and searching for her, and to my horror, I didn't see her anywhere. The creek was a brown color, and so I couldn't see the bottom. I was diving down and grabbing anything I could find to see if it was her. I was seriously hysterical at this point in time. I kept saying, "No, no God, please no," and shouting my daughter's name. Now, Steve, along with my daughter, heard me splashing into the water and then heard me calling to my daughter. He could see the empty boat a little ways down the creek and started running to find out what was wrong. Also, Steve's grandmother was in the kitchen, which is located just behind the bush of the bank where I was at, and heard me as well. She too got up and headed towards me to investigate. I remember hearing her asking me what was wrong, so that I just kept repeating that my daughter was in the water and asking where she was. I believe I was on the verge of fainting until I saw Steve holding my daughter on the bank. Then confusion kicked in. I was so thrilled to see my daughter, but at the same time, dumbfounded about it. He helped me onto the bank, and I held my daughter like there was no tomorrow. While I was doing that, Steve's grandmother was explaining to him what she heard and saw. I had them both confused as well. I told him what I saw, and Steve slid into the water and began to look around, but said he didn't see or feel anything. His grandmother was silent while this was going on, but then spoke up with this grief-stricken look on her face. She said, "Oh my, it must have been Harriet." Both Steve and his grandmother hung their heads, but I was still clueless since I had never heard the story before. That's when she explained to me what happened all those years ago. Slowly, it all started to make sense. Why I hadn't seen the ripples in the water, why I didn't hear the splashing, why in seconds it took me to get to her and she had vanished. Since that day, I've never gone near that park of the bank, and I make sure my children do the same. I have a son as well. It's horrifying what I'd seen and went through, and I pray that no one has to go through that. My brother's story, I'll keep short. My brother David is a semi-truck driver. He runs his rounds all week long and comes home for the weekends. As some of you may know, there are times when you're driving long into the night. On one particular night, David was driving down a road, heading back towards the interstate with a buddy of his in his truck. He was making good time, wasn't tired yet, and decided to wait and stop at the next rest area down the interstate. I believe he said it was between 10 and 11 p.m. when they saw her. His buddy saw her first and started screaming, as David would say, like a little girl. When David turned to look at his buddy, his attention went immediately to the passenger side window. There, a woman had somehow clasped onto the outside of the door and was staring at him through the window. He described her as pale white, shoulder-length blonde hair, and dark eyes. He said she kinda glowed, but claimed the full moon could have made her look that way. The woman was only there for a couple of seconds before she disappeared. David's buddy said he had enough fun for one night and crawled into the back of the semi and onto one of the bunks. A few weeks later, during daylight hours, my brother found himself on that same road and stopped at a local truck stop to eat. There were other truck drivers there, and out of the blue he asked, "I know you're all gonna think I'm crazy, but have any of you seen a woman on the side of your truck? Late at night, while you're driving down this road?" This is the story they told him. About 10 years ago, a woman was standing on the side of the road. She was alone and having car trouble late at night. She spotted a semi down the road, heading in her direction. In an attempt to wave him down, she walked down to the middle of the road and started waving her arms. Apparently, the truck driver was so exhausted that he didn't even see her, or so people think. He ran over her and didn't stop, just kept going. To this day, no one has been pressed with charges for the crime. Now they say that any semi that drives down that road at night could be a suspect to the woman. My name's Jody. I'm 20 years old, from Australia, and have been reading the stories on your site for years. I just thought, what the heck, I'll get into one of my own. This isn't that much of a scary story, it just freaked me out a bit. This happened back when I was 17. I was dating this guy, we will call him Steve. One night, me, Steve and my sister, and one of his mates all went out on a double date. It was about 11 when we ended back at Steve's house. Me and my sister decided to bunk down there for the night as I was too tired to drive home. I was the first to turn in as I had work the next day, and the boys and my sister decided to stay out on the back patio for a while. I was in Steve's room and I must have dozed off when all of a sudden I woke up, but I couldn't even open my eyes. I tried to open my mouth, but I couldn't. At this point, I was literally crapping myself. I didn't know what to do, so I started to panic. Then, all of a sudden, I started feeling really sick, then had a mental picture of a man in the doorway. I may have just had a bad dream, but I am almost certain that it was real. I told my sister what had happened on the way home, and she told me that she had the same eerie feeling the second that she walked into that house. Thanks for reading. My name is Virginia East, and I'm now 20 years old and live in Freedom, Indiana. I grew up on the south side of Indianapolis. I mostly lived with my grandmother throughout the first 5 years of my life, but I always lived not too far away from her. My grandmother's house was originally built as a saloon. I don't know what year it was built in, but my guess would have to say close to or about the mid-1900s. I'll start off by telling the story as to why I think her house was haunted. One night, while the house was still a saloon, two men had gotten into an argument upstairs over a woman. The outcome of the argument was one man was murdered. We strongly believe that his spirit had never left that house and that his murderer was a redhead. I'll get to as why I think that later. My first personal experience happened when I was about 9 years old. My younger cousin and I were going into the basement to finish a project that we were painting. As we got halfway down the stairs, we both saw something that appeared to be a man back about 50 years ago by the way he was dressed. We stood still and back up about 2 stairs and watched to see if it was a burglar or if it was actually a ghost. The next thing we saw was a noose hanging from one of the beams in the ceiling and a chair underneath it. The man stepped onto the chair and put the noose around his neck. When he kicked the chair out from underneath him, he disappeared into thin air. My grandmother had several experiences in this house. She had a little dog that she loved to play with rubber bouncy balls. She was walking past the basement door one day to go into the kitchen and she heard something being dropped down the basement stairs. She opened the door to find a little boy bouncing a little blue rubber ball down the stairs. The young boy looked back at her and disappeared. She went to the bottom of the stairs to retrieve the ball and put it in the cabinet. The next day, she heard something else being dropped down the stairs, but this time, it was a more solid sound. She looked in the cabinet and noticed that the blue ball was gone. Not thinking much of it, since she had several young small grandchildren, she opened the door again to find the same little boy, but only this time bouncing a marble down the stairs. My grandfather had passed away in his home sometime in 1997. He died in my grandmother's bedroom. When my grandma came home from the hospital, she had went upstairs one night to go to sleep. She had always slept on the right side of the bed. If you look at it from the foot of the bed, she had rolled her head over to the side that my grandfather would sleep on, and she saw an indentation on the pillow. It was an indent of a head, as if someone was lying next to her, but there was no one there. The man that had been killed in the fight when the house was still a saloon, us grandchildren started calling him Turk. I don't know why, but it just seemed to fit. But this is why I believe that the murderer was a redhead. When my mother and aunt were teenagers, they would always sneak into the bathroom to smoke. On several occasions, they couldn't even get the bathroom door open. My mother and aunt are both redheads. On several occasions also, when one of them would go to the bathroom, they would get locked in, and there was not a lock on the outside of the door. One incident, when 2 of my older female cousins and my older brother went up to the attic to get something for our grandma, something strange happened. As they were all making their way down the stairs, my brother was the last in line. My brother is a redhead. He was the only true redhead out of the 3 of them. As he was coming down the stairs, he felt something grab him from his wrist, forbidding him to go any further down the stairs. My cousin that was in front of him turned back to see what was going on, and all she saw was my brother leaning in midair with his right arm being held by something that wasn't there. My cousin tried to pull him free, but to no avail. Finally, he was released, and they never went into the attic again. After my grandmother passed away in 1999, the house went up for sale. Well, it had 3 different buyers, and they all just left it. So, in late 2001, the city decided to tear it down. The house is no longer there, but 2 of my older cousins and my aunt live right across from the street from where the house used to be. We believe that Turk may have traveled over to their house. The reason being was because after Grandma's house was torn down, we started hearing heavy footsteps walking across the hall upstairs and up and down the stairs late at night, and no one goes upstairs. At this point, the upstairs was still blocked off. Thank you for letting me share my experiences, and I hope you really enjoyed this. If I have any more experiences that might show up in the future, I'll let you know so you can all get a taste of Turk again. the paranormal entity that haunted my grandma. When Phantasm strikes, you can always rely on Phantom to bring you some narrated stories of an epic proportion that you really like. I don't know what that means, guys, but thank you so much again for tuning into this horror narration that I do of ghost stories every single time I upload. I hope you guys enjoy the ghost stories. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you comment. I hope you like. I hope you subscribe, especially since I'm like 15 subs away from like, what, 6K? I mean, 10K? I don't know what I'm talking about. 10K is the number. See, a lot of times when I mess up, I just leave it in the outro because I wanted to prove to you guys that I'm human. I make mistakes, and it's a good stress reliever because when I mess up for some odd reason and I just say some stupid things, it just makes me feel really good. I don't know why. It's just like the outro is just my place to, be a nonsensical human being and really just show you guys that I'm a human being and I like interacting with you guys. So in the comment section below, well then, the audio got screwed up and my voice got lower, and I'm totally keeping that in the outro, by the way. But no, seriously guys, good night, good morning, I'll see you in the next video, and let's get the 10K because it's so near.